Thank you, Bruce. I'd like to take a minute to introduce our speaker tonight, Saul Einbinder. Saul has held senior technology and business positions at Bell Labs, Lucent Technologies, uReach Technologies, and Spirent Communications. He has appeared in on the New York Times, Boston Globe, Communication Week, Forbes, Marketplace on NPR and CBS Radio. After retiring in 2020, Saul created this Demystifying seminars and has been teaching in the continuing education programs at Tufts University, Rochester Institute of Technology, and Rutgers University, and several other local lifelong learning schools. Tonight, Saul will focus on demystifying commercial space exploration. Saul?
Thanks for inviting me in to speak with you all this evening. I've got, I guess, probably about 35, 40 minutes of material, and I'll ask you to interrupt me along the way. Just come off mute and shout out a question. If that gets a little out of hand, then we'll take all the Q&A to the end. Jot down questions as we go, because it's really your interactions that make this the most fun, not just for me, but for everybody. Bruce, I'll ask you if you wouldn't mind if people are putting any questions or other comments into the chat. I won't be able to see the chat as we go along. So just, call that to my attention. And also, if somebody could make sure that you go off mute and laugh at all my jokes or what I think of jokes, that would also be really helpful. Okay, see, then that didn't happen at all. So let's dive in. We'll do a share here. The jokes don't get any better than that. And we've got to bring up the video panel so I can see you. All righty. So we'll be talking about space exploration tonight, and in particular human space exploration, the current state of the United States program and some of the folks involved. There's lots of other aspects of space exploration, astronomy and planetary probes and things like that. But we're going to focus on what's going on in terms of human space exploration. There are two things in particular that I'd like to try to convey. I hope you come away with a little bit of the who's who of what's going on, so you can maybe kind of keep track a little better for some of the news that you're hearing. And also wanted to try to convey the new model that NASA is working in, which has some pretty profound implications for what we're able to accomplish and how things roll out going forward. In particular, we're going to dive into the space billionaires. These are three folks that take up they get a lot of news coverage: Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Richard Branson. When I do the full course, I cover all three of these. For the sake of a shorter session tonight, we'll only focus in on Elon Musk. And in Q&A, we could talk a little bit more about Bezos and Branson. But these folks get a lot of media play, and Elon Musk in particular gets a lot because he's the most got the most robust program. Elon Musk, of course, is also the founder of Tesla. His vision is that he wants us to be able to have cities on Mars. Jeff Bezos envisions that humanity will be in space with space cities, like orbiting around the Earth or possibly on the moon. Richard Branson, he's not about exploration as much as tourism. I mean, he's a tourism type of entrepreneur, and he's working to be able to allow you to get on a space plane and go to space just as easily as today you'd get on an airplane. These three guys have started their companies all about close to 20 years ago with their money. When we say space billionaires, how much money are we talking about? These numbers change, every day. At the beginning of this year, Musk was about $160 billion. That was his net worth. Jeff Bezos, who of course, is the founder of Amazon, was worth about 190. I think those two have traded places, whatever, who cares? Richard Branson's only worth like $4 billion. And of course, there are many other names in the business that you're pretty familiar with: Boeing, Lockheed, et cetera, and maybe some smaller companies that you're not, that we may touch on. But let's spend a little bit of time with Elon Musk. So his vision is to make the human race multi-planetary. He sees that we'll be a spacefaring civilization, a multi-planet species, and we'll be able to live on Mars or other planets. And he wants to help get that going. He has very, very ambitious goals. January 2020, so a little over a year ago, he said he hopes to be able to send 1 million people to Mars by 2050 and be launching 3 rockets a day by 2030, sending people to Mars. An audacious goal. Earlier this year, in January of this year, he said he expects to land people on Mars by 2026. He's a person who tends to set extremely aggressive goals and not necessarily meet them on those dates, but that's okay. It's that's how he gets his teams motivated and working, by setting very aggressive goals.
So
Yes.
that would be a one-way trip, though, right? He's not contemplating a return.
Well, for the first ones, he certainly is. Like that 2026 date, that would be round trip, because there's not any infrastructure to support long term on Mars. So you've got to send some missions to go and build some infrastructure so that people can stay there longer. So getting into space is very, very difficult, and let's talk about 2 things in particular that make it pretty difficult. One of them is known as the rocket equation, and the other one I call the human equation. And these 2 factors drive a lot about how people get into space, about what their business models are, what their goals are. So let's look at them. First, the rocket equation. Take a look at the rocket on the right-hand side. You may recognize that as the Saturn V from the Apollo program. And I think you probably already have a bit of an intuitive feel for what the rocket equation is all about. It's about the ratio of how much fuel you need versus how much payload you can bring to wherever you're going. So if you look at the Saturn V, most of the rocket is fuel and machine, and up at the top is a little bit of stuff that you're trying to get into space. And this is what the rocket equation is all about. It balances out the force of gravity that you need to overcome, balances that against the amount of energy that you get out of your fuel, and it tells you this ratio. So what do you do with this? Well, let's say you're trying to get to the International Space Station, or you're trying to get to the moon. Earth's gravity is punishing, very punishing. Let me take a side journey here for a moment. So here we have our Earth and the moon. Is the show of hands, please? Is the moon affected by Earth's gravity? Yeah, of course, right? Obviously. It's held in place by Earth's gravity. If it wasn't for Earth's gravity, it would fly away. Well, this coin is held by Earth's gravity, but it falls. How come the moon just doesn't fall down, crash into the Earth? Because it's going very, very fast, right? And it's balanced out. The speed that it's going, trying to get away from the Earth, is exactly balanced by the gravity that's pulling it back towards the Earth. The lesson there is, if you want to get into space, you go up. But if you just shot a rocket straight up to the moon, and that's all you did, it would come back down. In order to be in orbit, you have to go up and go fast. So for example, the International Space Station down here. The International Space Station is not particularly far away. It's about 250 miles up, like, New York to Boston distance. And if you just put a rocket straight up 250 miles, the space station would go whizzing past you, and then you'd fall back down. You have to go match its speed. How fast is the International Space Station flying? Anybody know that answer? Or want to take a guess? Better if you could take a wild guess if you don't know the answer.
17,000 miles an hour.
That's a guess from a person that knows the answer. Yes. Yep, 17 and a half, something like that. We just the other day, over the weekend, we were listening to news about that Chinese rocket that was coming down, and they kept saying 18,000 miles an hour because that's the speed that it had to achieve to put its payload into orbit, in low Earth orbit. So it isn't just getting off Earth isn't just about overcoming the gravity. It's about overcoming the gravity and getting to a certain velocity to stay in orbit wherever it is that you're trying to get to. So if we wanted to get into orbit, low Earth orbit, like 250 miles where the space station is, the rocket equation tells us that about 4% of the entire mass, the entire weight of our rocket ship, is the stuff that we're trying to get into orbit. 96% of it is the fuel and the engines and everything else you need just to get the 4% where you want to go and get it up to speed. If you're trying to get to the moon, then you only get 1.5% payload. That's why the Saturn V rocket looks like it does. It weighed 6.5 million pounds at launch. And what did it bring to the moon? Basically 3 guys and a buggy, and enough fuel to get them back home. If you're trying to get to Mars, then you get less than 1%. Okay, 2 big conclusions that we're going to get to because of this math. Imagine that we want to build an outpost on the moon. Well, let's start by looking at the International Space Station. It weighs about 450 tons. Any kind of an outpost, the estimates are it would take about 10 million tons of material to build an outpost. So the first conclusion is you're going to be doing a lot of trips. And if you're using the old kind of style of space exploration, build a rocket, send it up, build another rocket, send it up, it's totally unfeasible. So in the space industry today, reusability is what everybody's after. All these companies, NASA, are looking to build reusable craft because you need to make many, many trips to do anything significant beyond a one-shot type of event. And the other thing is Earth's gravity is too punishing. So you need to find fuel and other resources off of Earth. Almost any place else that you could imagine getting resources from is less punishing from a gravity perspective than Earth. Getting things from the moon, from asteroids, even from Mars, their gravities are so much less that if you can mine those places, you can solve problems that you can't solve just working from Earth. And these are the 2 factors that come from the rocket equation that dictate so much of what's going on in the space program today. The other side of the coin is the human equation. This has a little bit less math, just as important. You are very difficult. Let's put that into context. There are about 200 about 200 countries in the world today. About 15 of them roughly can launch stuff into space. There are only 3 countries that can launch people into space: United States, China, and Russia. Nobody else has ever launched people into space, because putting people into space versus just cargo or robots or probes is so much harder. Why is it so much harder to put people into space? Well, just to get them into orbit, for example, of course, you need a pressurized capsule. You need a place for people to be. You need the air, food, and water for them. You need to take care of waste. People, when you put them into space, generally speaking, like to come home. And if you're going into orbit, that means you're going fast. And if you're going fast, then when you come home, that's when you have that heat problem coming through the atmosphere. So now you need heat shields and parachutes. If you're just sending a probe to Mars, you don't have this problem. But a whole bunch of engineering goes into bringing people back back to Earth and landing them in splashdowns and such. Lots of training for failures and safety systems. If you're trying to go further to the moon, for example, you have to worry about heat in a different way. You need more air and such. Of course, you need more return fuel because once again, people tend to like to get home. Going to Mars is several orders of magnitude yet more complicated. And one of the reasons is radiation. Here on Earth, we're protected from the solar winds, the sun's radiation by the magnetic fields of the Earth. The International Space Station still gets some of that protection. But when you're going to Mars, you don't have that. And that amount of radiation is very punishing. And it's difficult to design a craft that can protect you. Once you get to Mars, you can build cities underground, but it takes about 2 years to do a trip to Mars. About 6 months to get there, 6 to 9 months to get there. Once you get there, you'll spend a few months, and then another 6 to 9 months to come back. So you wind up with a pretty high risk of cancer from radiation on your first trip to Mars, unless that problem has been solved. And frankly, it's not well solved yet. Also, because you're going to be away for 2 years, you have to think differently about medicines and emergency situations. You know, if somebody has an impacted tooth when they're on the moon, you can get them home in a couple of days. Not true for Mars. You need to be able to handle everything. Of course, you need much more return fuel, and there's lots of work going on trying to figure out how to stage the fuel, how to develop fuel. And sanity becomes an incredibly difficult problem. If, this men's club, you guys have been together for a while, you get along really great. But if we put you into a small craft for 6 months, you would not be getting along great. And despite many attempts to kind of minimize and gloss over and get people that get along really well, this is a very significant problem. Maybe you've read about some of these studies where people are in a simulation for 6 months. It's a hard problem. All of this human equation stuff is covered really well in a book I'd like to recommend called Packing for Mars by Mary Roach. Beautiful book, really enjoyable read. It's not a bunch of science stuff. It's a bunch of a collection of stories about understanding and preparing and all of the experiences over the decades. I'll just quickly read this paragraph. To the rocket scientist, you are a problem. You are the most irritating piece of machinery he or she will ever have to deal with. You and your fluctuating metabolism and your puny memory, your frame that comes in a million different configurations. You're unpredictable. You're inconstant. You take weeks to fix. The engineer must worry about the water and oxygen and food you'll need in space, about how much extra fuel it'll take to launch your shrimp cocktail and irradiated beef tacos. A solar cell or a thruster nozzle is stable and undemanding. It does not excrete or panic or fall in love with the mission commander. It has no ego. Its structural elements don't start to break down without gravity and works just fine without sleep. So I recommend go check this book out at the library or get a copy on Amazon if you'd like to understand this side of things. Okay, Bruce, I'm going to ask you to give me a time check here about how much longer can I go? Because of course I could fill 2 more hours, as I think you know.
I think you're fine at this point. You're at 7:47. You started at 7:30. So.
Okay, so I probably will do another 20, 25. And if I see people starting to nod off, I'll talk faster. So let's get back to Elon Musk and SpaceX. SpaceX is building roughly 3 things: Falcon, Dragon, and Starship. Let's look at each of these. Falcon 9 is a rocket, a reusable 2-stage orbital and lunar rocket. Let's break that down. Reusable, of course, that's self-explanatory. They can fly this craft multiple times and they recover it when it comes back down. 2-stage, okay, it's got a bottom stage and which launches it up into space, and then a top stage that can get it up to speed and into orbit or further. And that makes it an orbital rocket or potentially a lunar rocket. This rocket was developed in the 2000s and began flying since 2010. Very, very successful. A lot of firsts under its belt. SpaceX was the first private company to launch and orbit and recover a spacecraft. First private company to send a spacecraft to the International Space Station. First company to put satellites into geosynchronous orbit. Many, many firsts with this. They have perfected the recovery of these boosters. I don't know if you've seen these boosters land. They land vertically. If we have some time, I'll show you a little video of that. And since they got that down pat, they recover most of the 98% of them. I think they had one miss last month, so it's probably a little bit lower now. This has been flying for NASA and for commercial customers, delivering satellites for the Air Force, other countries, science probes, and things of that sort. There's a cousin of the Falcon 9 known as the Falcon Heavy, which roughly looks like 3 Falcon 9 boosters duct taped together. I'm pretty sure they don't use duct tape, but architecturally, that's just what it is. This started flying in 2018. It's launched 3 times so far. And I think I'd like to show you a quick video. Oh, one more thing. Let's look at how big are these rockets? Just to give you a size reference next to the Saturn V. And let's take a look at the Falcon Heavy, its first launch. This was in 2018. You might have heard in the news, Elon Musk put one of his Tesla Roadsters into space. Anybody remember that news story? So we're going to watch just a 2-minute video. This is a SpaceX video, so it's got production. Now that Tesla that was shot into space had a dummy that was known as Starman, and the whole thing was to the David Bowie theme. So that's the soundtrack to what we're going to see here. SpaceX Falcon Heavy and Starman. Take a listen.
It's a god-awful small affair to the girl with the mousy hair, but her mommy is yelling no, and her daddy has told her to go, but her friend is nowhere to be seen. Now she walks through her sunken dream to the seat with the clearest view, and she's hooked to the silver screen. But the film is a sad thing for she's lived it 10 times or more. She could spit in the eyes of fools if they ask her to focus on sailors fighting in the dance hall. Oh man, look at those cavemen go. It's the freakiest show. Take a look at the low man beating up the wrong guy. Oh man, wonder if you'll ever know who's in the best-selling show. Is there life on Mars?
Okay. So lots of technology going on there. Those vertical landings, SpaceX was the first company to be able to do that successfully. A lot of folks said it couldn't be done. It took years and a lot of experiments to get that to work. Okay, let's move on to their next craft, the Dragon capsule. This is a reusable spacecraft to take people or cargo to the International Space Station. So this was developed in cooperation with NASA. And you probably have heard some news about this lately. Last summer, it had its first maiden flight with crew to the International Space Station. So the first private company ever to put people to the space station. And then just recently, just a couple of days ago, actually brought the second crew back home. Late this year, SpaceX will offer the service of their Falcon 9 rocket and this Dragon capsule to a commercial player who will have the first totally commercial launch of people into space. And by that, I mean, NASA has nothing to do with it. There are no NASA astronauts, 100% private launch into orbit using this craft. And then there's Starship. And Starship is Elon Musk's big, crazy idea rocket to get 1 million people to Mars eventually. This is a reusable 2-stage interplanetary spacecraft and rocket. What does that all mean? 2-stage, the top stage is the spacecraft, the part that actually gets into space. The bottom part is the booster that takes you up out of Earth's immediate gravity. This is a big craft currently under development. You notice it in some configurations, it has seating for 100 people. They haven't built any in that configuration yet, but that's its design. This top craft can be configured to take a bunch of cargo, a few people, or potentially a lot of people. This has been in development for quite a few years. Over the past summer, they started doing some successful short tests, and over the past 2 or 3 months, they've done a few altitude tests up to about 10,000 feet. And for the first time, just a couple of days ago, had complete success with that. But I want to show you a short hop test that they did because it illustrates just, well, frankly, how cool the technology is here of what's going on. We're going to see the first time they flew this rocket just a few hundred feet. And you're going to see this top part, the spacecraft part, not the booster. They haven't built that yet. Without a nose cone on it, no flaps or anything. It looks like a big soda can. And they're going to put it up only a few hundred feet and then shimmy it left and have it come back down and land precisely where they want it to land. And they're doing all of that just by controlling the balance from where the engine is pointing. So here is the rocket that we're going to launch. It's going to go up a little bit, shimmy left, and land on this pad.
3, 2, 1.
No fins or anything on this, no aerodynamics, purely being balanced by the direction of the engine. Okay, so that's Starship. Now let's change directions here. I'll pause if anyone has any questions about anything so far. We're going to change directions a little bit now.
No questions on chat. So.
Okay. I don't see any hands waving, so let's move along. Let's say what's going on with NASA these days. Let's look at the U.S. space program. In order to understand where we are now, we've got to back up a little bit, 15 or 20 years actually, to understand how we got to where we are. And then we'll fast forward to back to today and show you where things fit together and what's going on. So I'd like you to think back to early 2000s. and kind of how we were feeling about the space program at that time, the pluses and minuses. You know, in the early 2000s, it had been 30 years since we had last been to the moon. The International Space Station had just been completed, and a very successful program, and had been started to be occupied since November 2000. Actually, just celebrated its 20 years back earlier, late last year. But in the mid 2000s, it's already looking old in that it's only funded through 2015. And so people are starting to get a little bit concerned about that. Then there's the Space Shuttle, which by the mid 2000s is pretty old technology. At that time, you know, after 2003 with the Columbia accident, the Space Shuttle isn't flying at all. We're getting astronauts to the space station with the Russians, and the Space Shuttle is extremely expensive. And this point is important. It has a very static design. What do I mean by that? NASA doesn't get funded to update the design, and the design that they're flying in 2000 is the design that they created 25 years ago in the late 70s. As a result of that, this is an example of, this is the computer that flies on the Space Shuttle. It's the Intel 8086. Sound familiar to anybody? It's what was in your desktop. In 2005, NASA is buying these on eBay. Now, that's not a slap to NASA in any way. It's that they've never been funded to do any changes to the design. So they're running those same exact computers, and they're buying spare parts wherever they can get them. We're going to circle back to this problem in just a few minutes. So this is where we are in the mid 2000s. In 2004, President Bush says we're going to go back into space. NASA puts a program together in 2005 known as Constellation. We're going back to the moon. I don't know if anyone ever heard of Constellation. I wasn't paying attention in those days. I never heard of it till I started doing the research for this lecture some months back. And it's got some interesting aspects to it. One that I want to point out in particular is there's a new capsule. That's the top of the part of the rocket that takes the people, known as Orion, the Orion capsule. And it's got a bunch of other things. So this was 2005. And by 2009, just 4 years later, there's some good news and there's some bad news. The good news is ice has been found on the moon. So that's a big deal because if you have ice someplace, then you can maybe set up some solar panels and melt it and have water. That's great. You can break it down into hydrogen and oxygen and you have air to breathe. That's super great. And hydrogen and oxygen are rocket fuel. So the importance of, for the first time, finding ice close to home outside of Earth's punishing gravity is really big news. That's the good news. Everything else about Constellation is bad news. The whole program is pretty much a bust. Every major component is behind schedule. A bipartisan committee is pulled together. They look through, they decide this program's going nowhere. It doesn't have the right funding. You can't, everything's behind schedule, and some parts of it may never get built with the current funding levels. President Obama comes in, Congress cancels this program, and we start again. President Obama sets some new priorities. I guess I should say it's an interesting side topic if you want to get into it in Q&A about what presidents and NASA and Congress and how those interplay and who's really making decisions here. But in brief, the Obama program sets a couple of different priorities, and in particular defines a new spacecraft, a new rocket, I should say, what's known as a heavy lift rocket, and sets a direction to invest in private spacecraft. So here we are in 2010, and by this time, SpaceX and some other companies have been working, and the Falcon 9 is already flying. And so people, largely within NASA, are saying, why should the government be building rockets if the private industry is able to build them for less money. Maybe we should partner. And so the Obama proposal puts more weight behind that to help fund some private development, and also funds this heavy lift rocket, which is known as the Space Launch System. So the Space Launch System is a traditional rocket, expendable. Flies once and it's gone. It's orbital and lunar, so it's interplanetary. So it's a big rocket. It's got a lot of capacity, and it can take you kind of wherever you need to go. There you can see compared to the Saturn V. It's a big machine. It's in development currently today, right? So it started development in 2011, and here we are 10 years later. It's still in development and scheduled for a maiden flight late this year. Although frankly, it's almost certainly not going to fly late this year. It'll be in 2022. But it has passed its very critical hot fire test in March, and is on its way to the Kennedy Space Center to be final assembly for the first flight in 2022. That'll be an uncrewed flight. Does this any of the components of this rocket look familiar at all? They ring any bells? It looks a little bit like some of the space shuttle components, doesn't it? It's got this big core rocket and two side boosters. Well, not only does it look like the space shuttle, Congress mandated that it use as much of existing technology as possible in the hopes that that would keep the cost down and speed up development. I'm not sure that it's done either of those. But not only does it reuse the technology of the space shuttle, like these boosters, it's actually flying with used or unused space shuttle engines. They're not building any new engines for this rocket. They're using stock that they have on hand from the space shuttle program. Okay, so this got kicked off in 2011. In 2017, President Trump said, well, all this machinery is great. We need a target. We're going to the moon. Okay. So NASA put together a program known as Artemis. Artemis is the current US space program to land the first woman and the next man on the moon. How many people have ever heard of Artemis before this moment? It's not, NASA's not really great with the PR thing. This is our space program today. There's a lot of really interesting things in this program. It will, if it happens as it unfolds, there will be a first demonstration flight, as I said, targeted for late this year, but much more likely into next year without crew. Then another flight with crew that just circles the moon. And then finally in 2024, a landing back on the moon. And again, these dates are almost certain to slip. When NASA originally proposed this to the Trump administration, they said the date would be 2028. And the Trump administration said, no, you're wrong about that. 2024 is the right answer. So in the current environment, nobody will be at all surprised if that date gets rescheduled back to 26 or something. But on the books right now, it's 2024. A couple of important differences between this program and the Apollo program. This program is designed, well, the Apollo program was designed to prove that we could get to the moon and back. And this program is designed to give a platform to do exploration on the moon and beyond the moon. So there's a lot of science and engineering and robots and probes designed to work on the lunar surface and around the moon as part of this program. There are 5 major components. There's the Space Launch System, the big rocket. There's the Orion capsule, which if you were paying really close attention at this late hour, is the capsule that started its design life back in 2005. That's the capsule that we're flying people in this. There is a lunar lander, which we haven't, like, where's that coming from? How's that going to happen? and a whole bunch of work around what's known as lunar payloads. And this is all the science and probes and machines and robots and such that will work on the lunar surface. And then there's the gateway, which is kind of a mini space station hopping point that's in orbit around, essentially around the moon, that allows you to get to different places on the moon than Apollo was ever able to get to. Why didn't we ever discover water on the moon when we were flying Apollo there? Because we always went to the equator, and there's no significant amount of water at the equator of the moon. Why did we go to the equator? Because when you launch from Earth, that's the easiest place to get to. This gateway allows us to get into space near the moon and then change direction and land anywhere. This Artemis program is designed to land at the southern pole of the moon, where we can learn a lot more about water and other things there. So I want to talk about the different model. We'll get back to Artemis in just a moment. NASA, remember I said NASA is working in partnership with commercial companies now. Well, what's the traditional NASA model? Like when they're building that Space Launch System or they're building that Orion capsule, those are traditional programs. NASA specifies what they need. They specify the design. They put out a request for proposal, an RFP. They get bids from all these major contractors, and then they let out a contract. These contracts are essentially time and materials. They always run way over. They cost huge amounts of money. And when they're done, NASA buys the rocket and is responsible for it. The commercial services approach is very different. This is much more like how industry in general has been operating for the past 20 years. Companies today, they don't buy their own HR systems. They rent a service. They don't make their own video conferencing systems. They use Zoom in the cloud. Those are services approaches, and that's what NASA is doing. So in the commercial service approach, NASA specifies the outcome that they want, and they buy it as a service. For example, they buy seats on a SpaceX Falcon 9 with the Dragon capsule. They buy seats to get astronauts to the International Space Station. They're able to put people on the International Space Station without ever having to have bought a rocket. That's what's so significant about this approach. NASA helps fund the development. They make sure that they're creating a competitive environment where the people who are bidding for it can compete against each other, but also there'll be enough business that they can get other customers for their services, like SpaceX is doing. And NASA is not responsible for the whole life cycle. So this is the really significant advantage. Remember those parts that they were buying for the space shuttle on eBay? That problem vanishes because now SpaceX, for example, is responsible for upkeep of that Falcon 9 for as long as they want to remain in the business. NASA never has to buy those rockets or those capsules. Coming back to Artemis, let's see where we are. This Space Launch System, this first rocket has been built. The primary engine tests have all happened, and it's on its way to the Kennedy Space Center on a big ship as we speak. The Orion capsule, the first one, has finally been built. This is the capsule that will be on that first flight. Those were two traditional programs. Where's the lunar lander coming from? You know, the part that gets you down, people down, and equipment down to the moon. Well, NASA is using the commercial services approach here. And in late 2019, so only a year and a half ago, they put out their request for what they wanted, and 3 companies came and put bids in and said that they would design lunar landing capability. And one of the remarkable things, you look at these 3 approaches for landing things on the moon, they're very, very different. You think about a NASA Congress-funded, taxpayer-funded program. Hey, we're building this Orion capsule. It's that same thing. There's only one idea, and here they're able to get very, very different ideas and pick one. So just 2 weeks ago, NASA selected the SpaceX approach. What is that SpaceX craft? That's the crazy big Starship. This is SpaceX Starship in a configuration that they're proposing to land on the moon. And this is what NASA just 2 weeks ago or so selected. So that program is now giving Starship a boost in the arm, and we'll see more demonstrations of that ship over the coming months. The lunar payload service is also completely commercially driven. There are dozens of companies involved and many launches planned over the next couple of years. Whoops, where'd that go? I don't know why that's disappearing so quickly. Well, flashing very briefly there is a rover that you can keep an eye on for. It's called Viper, and it'll do some drilling on the surface of the moon to learn how to actually extract ice and do something with it. NASA is still saying we're on target for this first launch and for the rest of the Artemis program, but recently we've just had a change of administration, and we don't expect it to stay on track. Okay, we're in the home stretch here. Some of the rockets we've been talking about today: the Saturn V, the Starship, the Falcon Heavy, the SLS, and on the right the Falcon. We skipped over Jeff Bezos's Blue Origin rocket. Some of the things you might be interested in paying attention to. You know, if you're used to sort of thinking back to the Apollo days or the shuttle days, you know, every month or so within shuttle days, maybe every 2 or 3 months, there'd be a shuttle launch. There are launches all the time. There's tons of launches. Just when it comes to the Artemis program, that's going to take some time. There'll be some satellites that go out to the moon late this year. Maybe next year, more likely 2022, will be this first really big launch. That'll grab a lot of news, and then we'll watch for some of the other significant parts of Artemis. But there's a ton of other things going on all the time. SpaceX and other companies are launching rockets every other week, it seems. SpaceX is building a very large constellation of satellites to do internet. They'll be launching another rocket just in a week or so with 60 satellites on it. If you want to tune in for that launch, they're kind of fun to see if they can land the booster back. They'll be doing some Falcon Heavies. They haven't flown the Falcon Heavy for more than a year. We'll see another one of those for the Air Force over the summer. Blue Origin, that's again Jeff Bezos' company, has been gathering some news because they just announced that for the very first time they will launch people into space over this summer. And then, of course, that spaceship, the big rocket, it continues to be in development. They're putting that large booster stage together for the first time. We should see some tests of that over the summer and into the latter part of this year. And we expect them to do their first test to take that actually into orbit before the end of this year. A couple of things, just quick notes that aren't really particularly about the human program, but they're just so cool, I have to mention them. The James Webb Space Telescope is finally slated to launch at the end of this year. It's been years behind schedule. It's essentially replacing, why have I just forgotten the name of NASA's Space Telescope? So that launches the end of the year. And there's NASA is actually going to test the idea of redirecting an asteroid that might be coming to hit the Earth. You know, in the scenario where we get hit by an asteroid, like, why don't we just, you know, move it out of the way? Well, NASA is doing the first very preliminary test of that idea. And you'll see a launch for that late in the year. Okay, that is about it. So anything else I can tell you about, or we can take some Q&A. Yeah, you're on mute, Bruce.
The question was, I guess you didn't hear me.
No.
While we're doing all of this, what are the Russians and the Chinese doing?
So the Chinese are building an not international. The Chinese are building a space station for themselves. That rocket that came down just Saturday night was coming back from delivering components to the space station that they're building. They're not, to my knowledge, neither Russia nor China are doing anything as ambitious as trying to put people onto the moon or elsewhere. They are working towards automated systems that can do some mining. Chinese have landed craft on the moon to try to do that. I don't know about Russia in particular. China is more active.
And
Sorry, you're back on mute, Bruce.
You're on mute.
the piece that somebody reminded us in a chat saying that it was the Hubble spacecraft
Oh, thank you.
that you had the brain cramp on.
Yeah.
How receptive is the current administration to the space program?
That's a really great question, and the answer is we don't actually know yet. There hasn't been, there hasn't been a lot or really anything that the administration has said. So all we see is speculation at this point. It's the thing I alluded to before is that the administration certainly sets the tone. They make a budget request to Congress. It's Congress that actually decides what gets funded and what doesn't get funded. And sometimes that follows usually that follows the president's recommendation, but it doesn't always, and it certainly doesn't always match the priority levels in terms of how much a given program gets. That's up to Congress.
Okay, thank you.
Saul, is it starting to look at like some of these companies are going to turn a profit in terms of what they're doing, or is this all deficit spending on the part of the very wealthy?
Yep, that's a great question. So certainly all these companies have, they were funded by these billionaires, and they were, as you put it, deficit spending for a long time. I believe SpaceX is now roughly profitable. They have, these companies have these long-term visions, but then they have a business model that tries to get them to some kind of profitability shorter term than that. So, SpaceX has been delivering satellites and whatnot into space for quite some time, and continues to seek business with NASA wherever they can to fund their longer-term visions. So that, like, this lunar lander program, SpaceX is going. They were going to build the Starship anyway, and now they'll have some funding. Obviously, they need to do a lot of special work to turn it into a lunar lander rather than something else. But it goes in parallel. It supports and makes stronger the investments that they have to make. Blue Origin is doing this is putting people on their rocket so that they can earn some money doing that. Blue Origin also has contracts with the Air Force to help build their larger rocket. Virgin Galactic is Richard Branson's company, and that's all about just tourism. And that company has been struggling from a technology perspective and continues to delay. They seem very close to being able to offer rides in what is effectively a space plane, but it does keep getting delayed, and that's a publicly traded company, so you can watch what happens to their stock every time anything happens from them or in the space industry. They're definitely not profitable at this point.
Okay.
I believe I heard that SpaceX is going to be paid to get Soviet astronauts up to the International Space Station. So they may be paid by any country that needs to get an astronaut up there, such as Japan or any of the Europe.
Right. So they're a commercial company, and their agreement with NASA specifically allows them to take revenue any way that they see fit. that's the essence of this commercial public partnership, is that it isn't just that NASA is hiring them to do something, but NASA is trying to help them create a sustainable business. So they don't tie SpaceX's arms behind their back and say, you can only fly for us. They say, develop this capability for us, for NASA, and then you can sell that to whomever you want. And there was a story. Get to the end there. They are selling seats commercially, and there's a flight that they'll do near the end of this year. You might have heard about St. Jude's doing a fundraiser, putting people into orbit. There are 4 astronauts, just they're regular people going through training. They're not NASA anything. The mission commander is not a NASA astronaut. The person flying the craft, not a NASA astronaut. And that'll go up for the first time, a completely commercial, completely private space launch. And that organization is funded by another billionaire whose name I don't recall. And he's put this together, worked with St. Jude to auction off a seat, raffle off a seat as a fundraiser. And that whole program is buying 4 seats from SpaceX. So SpaceX is, able to get revenue that way.
I saw that piece in the newspaper.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch. Was there a question?
No, I said I
Yeah.
saw that in the
Yeah.
newspaper.
Right. Anil, I think you had a question before.
Yes, the question, tell us why the Earth's gravity is so punishing compared with the other planets.
Well, it's heavier, right? The Earth's got a lot more mass than the moon does, more mass than Mars does. So what that rocket equation tells us is just how much fuel it takes, how much mass of fuel it takes to get off of the ground. And the moon has 1/6 the gravity, and so it just requires so much less fuel. Even Mars has I think maybe 30% of the gravity roughly of Earth. So within it's not Earth doesn't have the highest gravity of any of the planets, but it has the highest gravity of any of the planets in our immediate neighborhood that are of interest for doing space exploration.
So it's a function of the mass of the planet, right? Directly,
yes.
Mass gravity equation.
Yes, exactly.
And one quick one, we hear about 18,000 miles an hour that these spacecrafts are orbiting. Where did that come from?
So
18,000 miles an hour.
Yep. So that's the speed that you have to be at in order to be in orbit at a specific height. If you are the further away you are, the slower you can be. If you imagine right here at Earth, if you throw a baseball, it falls down. Like you have to throw it. I don't know what the number is. It's probably in excess of 100,000 miles an hour to throw something at the surface of the Earth and have it be going so fast that it's trying to escape and it never actually hits the ground. So as you go up to 250 miles, that speed that works out the balance is 18,000 miles an hour. And the reason why that Russian rocket was going 18,000 miles an hour is because it was going to a space station at about the same height as our International Space Station, which is maybe slightly higher up. It's a 17,000 miles an hour for the International Space Station.
Finally, does Elon Musk have any plans to be one of the first to go in space?
Yes, that is certainly his dream, and he said it is his plan to live out his life and to die on Mars. Not in a fiery crash. I mean, that's his aspiration is to live out his life on Mars.
Yeah, well, the second one was to be on SNL, I guess, this week.
Yes.
One question that came in is NASA able to actually move the asteroid, and where does it want to direct it?
So this is a test of a concept, and it's not an asteroid which is actually threatening the Earth. So they've located an asteroid that's going along on its merry way. It's got nothing to do with, not going to come anywhere near Earth, and they're just going to nudge it and see if they can deflect it, and just kind of check out the math of how much force they're able to apply and how much deflection they get. And you know, it's not actually going to you know, change anything. But the first time you do anything, you learn a lot of stuff. It's going to take them, I think, a year and a half or 2 years just to arrive at this asteroid. But the launch is at the end of this year, and you know, it's just one of those cool things because we see that concept in the movies. Like, yeah, why don't you just throw a rocket ship out there and push it? Well, you know, it's very complicated, and so they're trying it out for the first time on a very small scale.
And another question we had is, what's your opinion of the new NASA administrator, Bill Nelson?
I actually haven't had time to know anything about him. I was pleased that there is one. The previous administrator, Jim Bridenstine, under the Trump administration, was the first time you had somebody who really was not from the NASA culture at all. But you know, he certainly was very sharp and did very well. But since he was like a direct political appointee, he said right after, you know, right in November, that he wasn't going to stay on. He didn't think it would be appropriate for him to stay on NASA into the Biden administration. So there was an interim, and I think the most encouraging thing I can say about the new administrator is that that position got filled so quickly in the new administration. I'll take that as a positive sign for NASA to, you know, remove any kind of doubt about what might happen. It's like, okay, we got administrator back to being able to move forward and make decisions.
About asteroids, we hear they have billions of dollars worth of rare earths metals on them. Is that fiction or is that a fact?
I'm not expert enough to say. To my very limited knowledge, I believe that to be true, but I'll have to be honest, Anil, that's not something I've looked at.
Okay, thank you.
Saul, I want to thank you for a very educational and well-informed program. I really appreciate it. If any members have any other questions, can they reach you, Saul?
Yes, certainly. I will actually, I'll send a little follow-up to Bruce that he can distribute, and I'll have my email in there, so you don't have to, you know, like start jotting it down right now. But yeah, I'd be delighted to take any questions. I'll send along just a little bit of, you know, maybe some video clips or things you can watch if you're interested, and feel free to reach back out to me.
That would be great. Really appreciate it.
And if I can add, if anybody is familiar with Ollie Rue at Rutgers, that's where Saul has been doing some programs. And Saul, you have some scheduled to come up over the next couple of semesters at this point?
So I've run with Rutgers the rest of the Demystify series, which covered artificial intelligence, self-driving cars, 3D printing, and this space. And just talking with them the other day, I don't think we're going to run those again for the balance of the year. I'm trying to get myself going to create a new class on gene editing, which is a topic I know pretty much nothing about. So I've got a steep climb there. So hopefully I'll be in the catalog for the fall with gene editing.
Thanks.
Great, thank you. Really appreciate it. I hope you all enjoyed the program. See you next month.